appeals presented by Hong Kong's High Court. China's foreign ministry expressed strong dissatisfaction and opposition to certain countries' blatant slander and defamation of Hong Kong's judicial system, pointing out that the central government firmly supports our authorities. Thailand's military stops fuel shipments passing through a border checkpoint with Laos because of fears they were being diverted to Cambodia, with which it is fighting a fierce border conflict. Ukraine's joint forces say that up to 200 Russian troops remain surrounded in Kupiansk. On 12 December, Ukrainian President Zelensky had visited the Kupiansk front, where he recorded a video beside the city's half-destroyed entrance sign. Tesla's board of directors has reportedly earned more than $3 billion through stock awards that far exceeded the value of those given to peers at the biggest US technology firms at the time they were paid. Azerbaijan's president has proposed the biggest prison amnesty in his country's history to mark the year of the constitution. Reports suggest the amnesty could affect 20,000 people. Actor, director and political activist Rob Reiner and his wife have been found dead in the Los Angeles home. The police are investigating the circumstances as an apparent homicide. And viewers, let's start with the top story. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has rejected Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's claim that Australia's recognition of a Palestinian state contributed to the deadly Bondi Beach terror attack, which targeted the Jew Hanukkah gathering. Speaking to a public broadcaster, Albanese said he did not see any connection between the two events and reiterated that a two-state solution remains the widely accepted path toward peace in the Middle East. Australia formally recognized a Palestinian state in September, alongside countries including Britain, Canada and France. The comments come amid a heightened concern over rising anti-Semitism in Australia. Jewish leaders have warned for years about increasing threats, with data from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry recording 1,654 anti-Semitic incidents just last year, a threefold rise since the October 7 attacks in 2023. Albanese noted that his government has taken steps to address communal tension, including appointing a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism and a separate envoy to counter Islamophobia. Following the Bondi Beach attack, he said his priority was to unite the country during a moment of national grief. And now joining me in this discussion is David K. Johnston, who's an American author and joins us live from New York. Thank you, David, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you and hear from you here at NewsX World. David, you must have heard of the criticism that has come Albanese's way, especially from Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but now, of course, he denies any such claims. Many have said, including the Jew community, that the attack was foreseeable, it was imminent, it was highly predictable. Do you think Australia's recognition of Palestinian state has anything to do with it, or possibly could have any role to play?
Well, we don't know that because the police in Australia are still investigating, but there's some indications that the father and son, the father is dead, the son is in the hospital in critical condition, were motivated by the war in Gaza and the related decision by the Canberra government to recognize a Palestinian state. It's unfortunate that Netanyahu has cast this the way he has, but the underlying problem we need to recognize is there's growing levels of not just anti-Semitism, awful as that is, but of various kinds of racial, ethnic, and religious hatred and hateful acts going on all over the world. This is clearly on the rise. These are things that are tracked by various governments and agencies, and they show this increase. And I think that's indicative of the deeper problems we have, particularly the economic problems we have, because while the world is becoming dramatically wealthier, it's also creating an environment in which more and more people are financially stressed and therefore dissatisfied and looking for some way to address their unhappiness that they have no control over.
Okay, what about the role and the origins of the attackers? Do you think it's the jihadist sentiment that they had led to this violent attack in Bondi Beach on the Jewish community?
Well, the father, who was 50 years old, had come to Australia 27 years ago on a student visa and eventually got a permanent residence visa. Both he and his son had been evaluated by national security officers in Australia and deemed not to be a threat. But now they're indicating that within the last year or so, the father and son became radicalized, and that the change in behavior by the father and son wasn't caught by authorities. I also suspect, by the way, Kirti, that this will lead to a review of Australian gun laws, just as New Zealand did after its mass shooting.
And yeah, that's the statement that indeed has come from Albanese. What progress do you think it's going to make in that regard, and if US can take any precedent from this swift statement,
well,
at least?
Unfortunately, in the United States, we have this idea that anybody should be able to carry a gun, whether concealed or openly, of any kind, any place. It's not every state that's like that, but it's widespread. In Australia, where 90% of the population lives along the shores, not in the interior, you can make a pretty strong argument for more severe restrictions on guns, whether they're handguns or, as in the case of this shooting, long guns. And that will certainly be a topic of a lot of debate. Also, access to ammunition. One of the ways to deal with mass shootings is to tax and closely track all sales of ammunition.
All right. Thank you for now for joining me in this discussion, but I request you to stay on, David. Moving on, viewers, let's also tell you that Pope Leo has prayed for the victims of the deadly terror attack at Sydney's Bondi Beach, which targeted the Jewish Hanukkah gathering there. And now, speaking during the Vatican audience event, the pontiff expressed grief for those killed and called for an end to anti-Semitic violence, urging people to reject hatred and intolerance. Let's listen into the Pope's statement.
Preghiamo per quanti soffrono a causa della guerra e della violenza. In particolare oggi desidero affidare al Signore le vittime della strage terroristica compiuta ieri a Sydney contro la comunità ebraica. Basta con queste forme di violenza antisemitiche. Dobbiamo eliminare l'odio dai nostri cuori.
And Germany has also unveiled a 10-point plan to deepen its support for Ukraine's defense, focusing on joint ventures, market integration, and potential federal investment guarantees during President Vladimir Zelensky's visit to Berlin. The plan aimed at strengthening Ukraine's defense industry amid Russia's ongoing aggression outlines closer cooperation in defense research, procurement, and joint projects. Germany, which is Ukraine's largest European supporter, is considering federal investment guarantees to back Ukrainian defense initiatives. Under the initiative, both countries will explore joint procurement of Ukrainian-made defense equipment, including interceptor drones to protect NATO's airspace through the European Sky Shield initiative. High-level consultations between defense ministries and the establishment of a liaison officer for the Ukraine Freedom House in Berlin are also planned to enhance industry ties. Germany will increase its military attaché presence in Kyiv and expand expert exchanges, while both countries will implement measures to combat corruption. And I now request David to join us back in the discussion here. David, we saw what happened to the United Kingdom. It has signed billions for Ukraine when its own economy is in a doldrum, and heavy criticism was mounted after the budget particularly. Now, Germany is making some advances for Ukrainian cause. How strong is the German economy to be able to make such concessions to Ukraine's fighting of the war, and how is the public in Germany expected to see these concessions for Ukraine?
Well, Germany is the largest economy in the European Union. It is so large that it dominates the European Union in many ways, particularly compared to countries to the south like Italy and Greece. And the German government clearly recognizes that if Putin prevails in Ukraine, it's just a matter of time before the Kremlin attacks another country. Putin's been very clear about this. He's engaged in various actions, including drone overflights and having Russian fighter aircraft interdict that of other countries. So the Germans are in a much better position financially. The British, having voted to leave the European Union, are slowly seeing their economy fall behind the European Union. This was an economically disastrous decision, motivated largely by appeals to racism and hatred and the arrival of immigrants from Europe and from Africa. So the British will face a much tougher prospect in supporting Ukraine. But I think it's clear European leaders recognize that there is a long-term, multi-decade threat posed by Putin's invasion of Ukraine almost 4 years ago.
Does it risk United States and Trump's wrath after these measures, especially when there's question looming on the transatlantic alliances after Trump's recent security strategy?
Well, Trump is putting forth a so-called peace plan, which is essentially a Kremlin document. It's almost everything the Kremlin wants, and proposing it as his own. And the Europeans recognize that Trump doesn't have a long-term strategic geopolitical philosophy. They're dealing with his just appalling ignorance about these issues. And they're trying to maneuver this so that they don't bear the full burden of this. They want to keep the U.S. in support. The European Union has put up more funds for this, and most of that money is supplying weapons and munitions and electronic surveillance materials, which are in the donating countries' job creation programs. They're not giving money, they're giving material, war material. And they're trying to make sure that they don't have to bear the burden of this alone. So keeping Trump within the family of we've got to stop Putin is the underlying goal, the unsort of stated goal by the European leaders, because if they put it the way I just did, Trump would immediately turn on them and behave as he often does, as a petulant child.
All right. For now, that's all the time that I have for this discussion. Thank you, David, for joining us once again today. And moving on, viewers, to news from the U.S. American director Rob Reiner and his wife have been found dead at their Southern California mansion, according to reports from CNN and NBC. The LA Police Department held a media conference Sunday evening, but declined to confirm the identities of the two individuals found deceased at the home of the director, known for films like When Harry Met Sally. At this stage, police have not named any suspects, and the investigation is still ongoing. The tragic discovery has left many in Hollywood and beyond in shock, as Reiner, who was 78, has had a long and successful career in both acting and directing. Let's listen in to people who are reacting to the news first. All right. I do apologize as we don't have those reactions as yet, but we move on from here, viewers. Now, the Rwanda-backed M23 group has captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers during its latest offensive in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. This comes as the clashes continue despite a warning from the Trump administration. Last week, M23 entered the strategic town of Uvira near the border with Burundi, less than a week after the presidents of Congo and Rwanda met in Washington with US President Donald Trump. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier said that Rwanda's actions in eastern Congo violated the Washington Accords and vowed to take action to ensure promises made to the president are kept. And moving on, viewers, the United Kingdom announced it will start regulating crypto assets from October 2027, aiming to give the industry clearer rules while keeping out dodgy actors, says the Finance Ministry. New legislation introduced to Parliament will extend existing financial regulation to companies involved in cryptocurrencies, aligning the UK more closely with the United States model rather than the European Union's framework. Finance Minister Rachel Reeves says the rules will strengthen consumer protections and boost market integrity. UK regulators, including the Financial Conduct Authority and the Bank of England, are also developing detailed rules for crypto trading, custody and stable coins, with final frameworks expected by the end of next year. Industry leaders welcome the clarity, saying firms can now begin preparing for the new regulatory environment, while the authorities continue to warn investors about the risks in the crypto market. All right, viewers, key details coming out in regard to UK regulation of crypto assets, which are now expected to start in 2027 in October. Details coming from the Finance Ministry of Ukraine. We'll shortly be joined in by our expert to give us more inputs on this. But a new legislation introduced to Parliament will extend the existing financial regulation to companies who are involved in cryptocurrencies, aligning the country more closely with models that have already been adopted in the European Union and the United States. Rachel Reeves, the Finance Minister of UK, has said that the rules will strengthen consumer protection and boost integrity of the market. And let's welcome Vasily Vidmanov, who's the COO of compliance and blockchain analytics firm Amalbot. He's joining us from Czech Republic. Hi, thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Vasily, how do you see UK now moving in this direction that European Union and US have already adopted the model? What's your first reaction?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a move to be expected, especially with other jurisdictions such as European Union coming up with MiCA regulation, United States with the Genius Act. So I would say strong jurisdictions such as the UK, it was largely expected from them. So what can actually mean that now in the UK, not only that the crypto firms will need to register for the anti-money laundering purposes, but they will be treated similarly as the financial institutions such as brokers or payment processors. So that will definitely mean that there will be a tighter oversight and they will have the reporting obligations. They will need to adhere to a very strict know your customer procedures. So I would say for the consumer side, the users will be better protected with this, definitely, and they might have some clarity who they're operating with. And of course, if something goes wrong, the regulator will be there to help.
Would you say that this is now likely to increase transparency and also like reduce the risk of fraud in a crypto trade?
Yeah, of course. Since those obligations for the registered entities that would like to conduct either the cryptocurrency exchange or the cryptocurrency custody, those rules will be rather strict. So it's not that easy to get this registration. So only the serious players will be able to obtain that. So, of course, this will bring more transparency for the customers because they will also know their rights, they would know what to expect. And we also see this across our ML Bots clients because we serve many regulated entities across the globe, and we see them preparing for the UK regulation as well. And there is quite a number of requirements that they need to fulfill in order to obtain the license.
Vasily, how do you think these laws are going to be different from that of the United Union, I beg your pardon, from the European Unions? They're more in line with the US's model, but slightly different from those of the European Union. So if you could help our international viewers explain the shift from European Union model.
Of course, I think the main difference is the European model implies the full licensing for the whole European Union, right? So there are a lot of countries involved. So once you get licensed in one European state, this applies for the whole European Union. Of course, with UK, there are fewer territories, so to speak, that will be covered. In general, the provisions are largely similar. I would say that the devil is in the details. For example, for the stablecoin issuers, there are slightly different provisions, but more or less the framework that was developed by the European Union, MiCA, where they treating the crypto institutions the same way as the financial entities, that largely stays the same and is applicable for the FCA regulation as well.
And how easy will be the implementation and enforcement of these rules? What are going to be some of the challenges in implementation and some of the loopholes that are likely to be exploited?
Yeah, so I would say also the same as with MiCA, the main challenge is for SMB, so small to medium businesses, to adapt to such regulation, because if you've been operating under the older regime where you just had to register with the Anti-Money Laundering Authority and fulfill some more or less formal obligations for reporting, now if you have the capital requirements and further you would need to spend for compliance way more than you did before. So the main challenge, of course, is especially for the smaller businesses or for the smaller teams to be able to afford it, right? Because you will also need to spend quite a lot on your legal team in order to get this license, and then you will need to maintain it. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger challenges. And as we saw with MiCA, I would expect that more and more companies that were operating in the UK under the older registration regime, they will be moving to the other offshore jurisdictions where the regulation is still less advanced than in Europe, in the US, or now in UK. So I think we will see this trend.
All right. Thank you, Vasily, for joining us for now and speaking to us, sharing all those details with us. And with that, viewers, it's a wrap on this bulletin of the World Report at NewsX World. But do continue to stay tuned to NewsX World for all international news and updates.